Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on today's Home Education Matters very first podcast. And we thought this would be a good opportunity to introduce ourselves and to tell you a little bit about what we're expecting from all our wonderful episodes of Home Education Matters. I am joined today by Diane, who's going to be my wonderful co-host for many of these episodes. Diane, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, yeah, lovely to be here. Yeah, really excited to sort of be hosting this podcast with you, Eleanor. We've got lots of exciting topics. We've got lots of interesting guests. So, I think you and I have kind of come to home education in slightly different ways. And I think hopefully that will make it a really interesting podcast for people to listen to.
I think so, because I came to home education, I kind of collapsed into home education from an early age because we were living abroad and the schooling options weren't so good. And so I just kept my children out and just taught them at home. And then when I came back to the UK, I realized it was actually a thing that I'd not even heard of. It was a concept called home education that I didn't know about. So sometimes I call it homeschooling by accident because that's what it was called whenever I lived abroad. So that's just me getting the words wrong, not me not understanding what it is. What about you though, Diane? Yours was a slightly more deliberate collapse, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if deliberate. So we've got other children who are at school. My daughter, who is home educated, she was someone that I knew from when she was little was going to struggle in secondary school, but you kind of give it a go, don't you? And you kind of, see how it goes. So we did she did transition to secondary school. She was really happy in primary school. So loved that.
I've heard that quite a lot. Some children like primary and then that move to secondary is a bit terrifying.
Absolutely. Because primary school's lush, isn't it? It's nurturing and it's, the teachers are lovely and, it's all about kindness and all of that sort of stuff.
Does it go to the dark side when it goes to secondary?
And then secondary school is, I think, as brutal as I remember secondary school being. I think it's, perhaps hasn't had the investment that primary school has to the same extent. So to me, it kind of feels quite similar to it, when it did like 30 years ago or something. So, I always knew she'd struggle with that transition. She is a child who's got a diagnosis of ASD as well. And I think actually all of my children are probably neurodiverse in some way, as are myself and my husband. But she's the one with the kind of diagnosis. So we gave it a go. We gave it a year in secondary school, but her mental health was just really
she struggling?
She was really struggling. And you kind of give it a while, don't you? And you kind of, so you kind of do the first term and you kind of think, okay, well, how's that going? And her birthday is just at the end of the first term, actually. Her birthday is just near Christmas. And it was at the point where she didn't want to invite any friends for like her birthday and stuff. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm not sure we're doing so well here. And then actually it kind of picked up a bit in the middle and I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe we can do this. And then by the end of year 7, her mental health was so poor and she was so withdrawn and she was not herself. So myself and my husband kind of had a discussion about it. And there were various options we presented to her, and this was the one she chose. And actually, it's my husband that does the home education because I'm the kind of main breadwinner now. So we were like in a fortunate position, really, where it could be an option for us. And she's, we feel like we've got her back now. So that's really.
How long have you been doing it?
Only since this September. So
like a few months.
Yeah.
A few months. You're very new. That's lovely. I love new home educators.
Because you are so experienced.
I'm old and you're new.
I'm quite old too.
Let's claim that you're young.
But new, yes, really new in the home ed world. Exactly. So we are still doing lots of learning. So hopefully that'll be good for this podcast because you'll be the voice of experience and, you'll be the one that's kind of done it.
I think it's actually very nice having both because I think sometimes when you've been doing it a long time, you get very set ideas about things and it's really nice to be challenged on some of those. Because when I started home educating, which was like 10 years ago, it was a very different home education scene then. it was predominantly people who had made an ideological choice to take their children out of school,
Mm.
or more often than not, never put their child into school in the first place. So it was quite rare to meet people, home educators, whose children had been pulled out of school back in the day,
Mm.
back in the
Back in the
mists of
day.
time. But nowadays, it's definitely the majority. Is the majority of home educators have pulled their child out of school for either anxiety reasons or bullying, or they can't keep up, or they've been off-rolled or something like this.
Mm.
And it leads to a completely different approach to home education, because a lot of people, and I think this is difficult for me and older home educators to recognize, but a lot of people don't want to home educate, and I think we find this quite hurtful, because we obviously love it and we chose it, and a lot of other people are like, I really hate home education, but I'm doing it anyway. And to us, it's like, how can you? It's like when you like Marmite and someone's like, I hate Marmite, and you're like, how could you? How is that possible? Anyway, so we get a bit affronted sometimes, I think, that people actively didn't choose this. So I think it's very nice, because you and I are both coming at it from really different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, yes, had it been me that was left with the primary role of home education, I think I might feel the same. But my husband has taken to it really, really well. So, and he's a kind
Does he
of
enjoy
natural.
it?
Yeah, and he's really, really he's a kind of natural teacher. So he did teach actually for a little while, some years ago, and he's also like so knowledgeable as well. So he's probably the brightest person I've ever met in my life. So I think she'll get a really good education, whereas if she was with me,
what sort
it would
of
be slightly different.
yeah. What would she be learning about? Cups of tea? This is how we make a cup of tea. I actually did a lesson in that when the children were quite young, because I wanted them to be able to make me a cup of tea. So
Great
you have to
life
use it for your
skill.
benefit, don't you?
Yeah.
So what sort of home education route is he taking with your children?
Well, I wouldn't say we've made an ideological decision, but I think we do recognise the real difficulties in the education system that exist. But we would like her to she's bright, so we'd like her to have opportunities later. So we are kind of vaguely following a curriculum of sorts. So we'd like her to be able to take GCSEs when she's ready to do so, and hopefully move on to sort of further education and higher education in due course. So we'd like to give her the opportunity of doing that. So yeah, so we are following a bit of a curriculum, although
are you using an online school or anything like that?
No, we have got a couple of tutors. So we've got a tutor for maths and we've got a tutor for English at the moment. And we are really feeling our way through that process, because you could end up spending a fortune, couldn't you?
You could. And tutors are expensive nowadays. The price have gone up a lot.
Indeed. So we need to kind of keep that down. But, we do, we're like everybody else. We need to kind of keep an eye on our costs. We've got other children, big overheads, all of that kind of stuff. So we definitely couldn't we couldn't do an online school, I don't think, and I don't think we could do many more tutors. So we do have to kind of really think about it. So
you have to prioritize. I found that I was similar. My children self-studied predominantly with my assistance, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
And I found that I only used tutors for the subjects that I just couldn't teach. My children wanted to learn German, so we got a German tutor, and my son was annoyingly good at maths and science, and I'm rubbish at those. So yeah, I would actually, I tried to learn maths with him when he was about 10. I thought I'll sit alongside him, and I was holding him back so much. I was like, what was this again? What's that funny Z that isn't a Z? So he's like, that's a sigma. I'm like, what? What's a sigma? And I thought, I'm going to have to outskill this one to someone else, because I was holding him back. But it can be an expensive process, tutoring. My son is now doing his A-levels at home, and it's expensive, because A-level tuition is even more expensive than GCSE tuition. It goes up about £10 an hour, pretty much. So we've had to do it. So we have a tutor, maybe not every week, or sometimes even just once a month. So he self-studies in between, and then he just has someone he can see once a month to make sure he's on track. But it can be an expensive business. But I've recorded another podcast that all our listeners can find, which is called Top Tips for New Home Educators, and that's with a lady called Helen Royston, who's been doing it a long time. I mean, she did make the point very clearly that it doesn't actually have to cost anything, home educating, and she's absolutely right. All you really need is to go to your library, get some books, and self-study the subjects. But it can be a difficult route that way. You have to have quite a motivated child, I think, for that to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
How
I
old is your
think
daughter then? Is she 11 or is she 12?
she's 12, so she's in year
Mm.
eight. Yeah, in terms of school year, she's in year eight, so she's nearly 13. She's coming up to 13 now.
Well,
So,
maybe you and I could do a podcast on GCSEs, because in actual fact, one of my tips is always to start GCSEs nice and early, because you can spread them out, because you have to pay for them yourself as a home educator. You spread out the cost and the stress and everything. So if you, in actual fact, at 12, I would be saying get them started on GCSE subjects. So you and I could do a podcast, because I'm sure that would be helpful for all our listeners as well.
absolutely, I think that would be really useful. And yeah, you find out all this stuff when you kind of start home educating. You think, oh gosh, I've got to pay for all these exams, and
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my God, they're like £200. And
I know. And all the subjects you can't do as well, which it really
yeah, yeah.
infuriates me. Things like art, music, PE, almost completely impossible to do as GCSEs. I mean, there are alternatives that you can do,
Mm,
but it's frustrating, I think. It's frustrating that they're closed off from our children. When my children first did some of their exams a few years ago, my daughter is dyslexic, and I wanted
mm.
to get access arrangements for her. Extra time, basically, which is she would have completely standardly at a school, and I had to pay more than £200 for an assessment that lasted 10 minutes
Oh
over
goodness.
Zoom, which was them saying, yes, she needs extra time in a laptop. And it's like, I know, I told you
Yeah.
that. And she had an official dyslexia sort of diagnosis from the Dyslexia Association, and she'd had it for years, and they still charged me more than £200. And I thought, this is what's so outrageous, is that it actually stops some people being able to get exams because of the financial cost of it, not just having to pay for the exam, but having to pay for the access arrangements, which I think now has changed. Now I think access arrangements are completely free. But
Oh,
back a few years ago, you had to pay, and it took my one exam for my daughter from £200 to £400, which is
goodness.
outrageous for one exam, really. She
Yeah,
did
it
get an
really
8 though,
is.
so it was worth it.
Oh, good for her. She did
I know.
well.
At 13, we were very pleased with that one.
Oh, yeah, indeed. Yeah, but I take your point, definitely starting GCSE kind of curriculums early. So, yeah, there's lots to learn, isn't there? That's what I'm finding out. There's lots and lots to learn about doing things slightly differently in the home education world.
Yeah, and that's hopefully what this podcast will do, is
Mm,
we're hoping that it will be a place where we can explore these different options that people have, but in a very sort of inclusive and non-judgmental way. We want it to be a really inclusive podcast. So if you're a structured homeschooler, or if you're there, see, I've done it again, I've called it the wrong word. If you're a structured home educator, if you're flexi schooling like you, if you have children at school and children
mm,
out of school, if you're doing it right from the start for an ideological reason, if you're just pulling your child out and you don't want to be doing it at all,
mm.
if you're structured unschooling, any of those, we want to be able to have podcasts that will appeal to all of you, hopefully, and also maybe just for those like me who've been doing it a long time, just open our eyes up a little bit to all the wonderful different routes there are that people are taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would be great, because it feels terrifying when you are in the school system and you then choose to take your child out, or I suppose if you don't put them in the first place, if you decide to home educate right from the word go, there is something, my husband and I would talk about it. There is something that feels culturally as if perhaps you're doing something wrong, you
Well,
know.
you are in effect, because you're making a
Yeah,
minority choice, and that always feels difficult, doesn't it, when everyone else is making a
absolutely.
different decision.
And it feels like you're
Actually, I
jumping
spoke
off a cliff.
Do you know, that's uncanny, because I spoke to a mother the other day who's wanting to take her child out of school, and she used exactly the same metaphor. She
Uh,
said she feels like she's standing at the edge of a precipice. And I said, the thing is, that implies that what you're jumping into is like a dark, scary
mm.
thing. But actually, it's more like you're standing at an ice cream counter choosing your flavor, because that's actually what home ed is. You've got so many options, and they're all lovely, and they all taste really nice and all brilliant. So, but I think before you do it, it feels really scary. And then when you're
Mm.
doing it, you're like, actually, this is brilliant. Why didn't we do this before?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely what we're finding. We're finding much more, oh, okay, we can do this and we can do this. And it's a bit like, yeah, for me, you kind of start, you maybe jump off a cliff, but you take off, you become like a bird and
Exactly.
you can kind of
You're
fly,
flying.
and it
Exactly.
is really exciting. And yeah, that knowledge that you can do what you like, actually, because this is your child's education and you can provide the education that you think is right for your child, and that's exciting, I think.
It is. And we're very lucky to have that freedom in this country, because a lot of
Mm,
countries are much more locked down when it comes to home education. And obviously, there are bills and all sorts of things going through that might affect that. But right now, we're
mm,
very fortunate that as long as we're providing a satisfactory education, then it's all good, and you don't need to see your local authority. You can just send a report once a year, and hopefully we'll be doing a podcast soon on that whole process of deregulating, what you do and don't need to provide, should you be having home visits, what should you be putting in your report, all of that kind of thing. So that will be coming up in one of the next few podcasts, so keep an eye out for that as well.
Great. Yeah, absolutely, because that can feel like scary stuff too.
It is. So we've got a podcast on top tips for those early days as a home educator. So that should be available now if you look for it in wherever you're streaming this from. And then we've also got, once a month, we're going to have an interview with a subject specialist. So somebody who may be a tutor or somebody who knows the subject very well and is going to give specific advice for home educators about how to help their child learn that one at home. So we've got history, maths, science. Some of these sciences, for example, are very different as home educator because you have to take IGCSEs, which are international GCSEs. And hopefully there's a lady who offers an arts award, a very good arts award that you can do online, which is equivalent to GCSE. Although I will caveat it that it's not always accepted by all colleges, as a lot of these are. My daughter wants to do an NCFE qualification in animal care, which is equivalent to 2 GCSEs, and most colleges accept them, but not all colleges. So it's really, it's one of those, again, it's one of those things where you feel a little bit when you start home educating that it's wonderful and you have all this freedom, but it also feels a little unfair, like you're on a slightly unfair footing, because you have to pay for your exams, and then some of the qualifications you can't do, and then other qualifications that you can do aren't accepted, and it's frustrating sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it feels a little bit because when you're in the school system, everything is very structured, isn't it, and very set up. And when you're home educating, actually, you have to navigate your way through this quite labyrinth-like process.
It's true, and you feel a bit on your own sometimes. So hopefully this podcast will help make people not feel so on their own, because we'll be going through the labyrinth with you.
Yeah, and that'll be great. Yeah, definitely. And I'll definitely be taking some tips.
You'll be there with your notepad.
Yeah.
What was that you said again? What was that? Resource providing, is it for art? That's perfect. I think hopefully we'll all have something to learn, and I will learn as much from you, Diane, as you'll be learning from me. So that's perfect.
We'll see.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Diane. I know you're very busy, and thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And do look out for our other podcasts that we will be putting up on all of your favorite streaming platforms.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, Diane.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.